Something the Big 12 is working on. Matt Fortuna joins us, Sick'em 365 Radio. Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate you being patient with us as well. So when Bob Bowlsby decided he was going to move on, there were all sorts of names that were thrown out. And you, in fact, have mentioned one of them, the Washington State president, that has a tie to the Big 12 as well. How often did you hear his name, and is it one that people really like and enjoy or think is a good answer for the Big 12?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. First off, appreciate the opportunity to come on your show and to speak to with your listeners. Like that was a name that, and I was familiar with Kirk Schulz as far as reputation-wise, just especially with the Pac-12 searching for a new commissioner last year, landing on George Kliavkoff and having Kirk Schulz essentially introduce him during the Zoom introductory press conference last summer. So he was a name that was at least somewhat familiar with people who cover college athletics, even though I don't know him personally. I've never, worked with him or interviewed him or anything like that. But that was a name that both me, Nicole Auerbach, and Max Olson, who wrote our candidate story, we're hearing a lot. And we're hearing a lot from different parts of the country and from different people at different levels of college administration and college football. And after we had put that candidates list out, that was a name that I heard even more as far as people who we had not spoken to, who read our story and reached out saying, man, like, Schulz be great. Like, that's a guy who, if he wants it, he's the guy they got to go get. How many times have we heard throughout this ever-changing collegiate landscape that the presidents are calling the shots and they don't really know what's going on under their nose on their own campuses as far as athletic departments? Kirk Schulz, by all accounts, is a complete opposite of that, right? When you look at some of the leadership positions he's been able to have, both within the Big 12 and within the Pac-12, being at Kansas State and Washington State, which are, no disrespect to those two fine programs, but by no means a USC or an Oklahoma as far as the kind of juice they hold within those conferences. This is a guy who has been very, very proactive and has come across as a good leader to everyone inside and outside of college athletics. And the other part that was pretty impressive to a lot of people was he came out pretty strong when Texas Oklahoma decided to leave for the SEC last year, when they announced they were going to leave for the SEC last year. He criticized the predatory nature of the SEC. He didn't back down. He really kind of rolled his sleeves up and put his fist up, for lack of a better analogy, saying we're not going to back down. And, that got him some laughs on the Paul Feinbaum show and from people in other parts of the country. But that's what everyone in the Big 12, everyone in the Pac-12, and everywhere really not other than the SEC want to hear at that point. And a lot of people think between, his very athletic nature relative to his other peers who are presidents and his brilliant mind, he's got multiple engineering degrees. He is a university president, which obviously is very smart. That's the kind of guy, the kind of bold, forward-thinking leader that a conference undergoing the type of change that the Big 12 is right now really needs to steer toward the future.
So if you had the kind of checklist, it would be someone who can kind of put their dukes up and tell Greg Sankey, like, that's good for you, but let's talk about this here. Someone who understands what all the athletic departments are doing and not just one team at their school because they go to the games when they're asked to, and someone who maybe understands the television landscape a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that these jobs turn over, and yet we're going to be on our fourth Power 5 opening really in the last 3 years or so since the Jim Delaney decided to retire in early 2019. And, it's been brought up to me, and I'm sure to you and others in this business throughout these processes. The Big Ten hired Kevin Warren. That was an out-of-left field hire. I don't think too many people, myself included, who are in the day-to-day of college athletics had even heard that name before. The Big Ten is also the richest conference in the country and probably could afford to take that risk, for lack of a better term. The ACC, meanwhile, hired Jim Phillips, the guy who many of us, myself included again, thought would eventually be the Big Ten commissioner. The ACC was not in a position to take a risk and to take a flyer on someone who is unfamiliar with the day-to-day of the college landscape. They needed a guy who has been in the trenches, who had negotiated TV deals, who had been part of realignment waves, as Jim Phillips was at Northwestern in the Big Ten, and who could help the ACC push forward from what's really a disadvantageous position financially relative to the other four power conferences. And when you look at some of the ACC struggles financially and some of the criticisms lobbed their way, and even them essentially becoming the public face for stopping progress toward an expanded college football playoff, oh, that's Jim Phillips. And you know what? That's Jim Phillips acting on behalf of his ADs, his presidents, all of his ACC institutions, and in some ways standing up to Greg Sankey and to ESPN, saying essentially, like, this is all the leverage we got as the ACC right now. We don't have a lot financially. We don't have a lot on the field outside of Clemson right now from a football standpoint, but we're going to leverage our position as best we can, and eventually we're going to get a better deal out of all this. And I use all that as a preface to say the Big 12 in a similarly vulnerable position right now, right? Just lost a couple schools, going to be adding a couple more. You need someone probably with familiarity with the Big 12 footprint, which obviously Kirk Schultz does, having been president of Kansas State, and having been president of Kansas State when the Big 12 lost 4 schools and added 2 more, and someone who is familiar with how hiring and basically leading a conference at the highest level is. And he did that last year in helping the committee find George Gladcock at the Pac-12. And the other part that we haven't mentioned yet, he did that with Bob Bowlsby. He was part of the 4-person search committee that ultimately hired the last Big 12 commissioner. So when you look at the boxes to check, and again, I don't know the guy. I have not spoken to him. I don't know what his interest or lack thereof may be. But everyone I've talked to at every level of college sports and administration in the last couple of weeks has volunteered this guy as someone who would be a home run in every way imaginable. And it's hard to argue against that when you look at the resume and the history.
Matt, there was one quote from an unnamed person, in regards to the open Big 12 commissioner job, an industry source, as you put it. I don't see a high-level AD wanting to attack what's about to happen to the Big 12 now. Would you say that was kind of consistently the opinion across the board, or was that more of an outlier of the opinions? Kind of what did you take from what people view the current landscape in the Big 12 as, especially this unknown moving forward?
I'd say it's pretty down the middle, and that quote represented probably 50% of the people I spoke to as far as their general perception. I mean, once the news broke that Bob Bowlsby was stepping down and there was a hole to fill, I, as I'm sure you guys and everyone in this business are reaching out to contacts and just trying to understand the lay of the land and what's missing and what's going to happen next. And, before even getting to names, I think there was a healthy discussion, at least among the people I spoke to, of, well, let's see, like, what's the Big 12 want to be? Like, is it still is it the same conference that Bob Bowlsby took over back in 2012? Is it, is it the worst of the Power 5 conferences? Is it even going to be considered a quote unquote Power 5 in the next couple of years after all this turnover? So I think there's a big question out there of, what's going to happen to the Big 12 and what's that going to look like, especially as we move forward into eventually expanded college football playoff and eventually into all the other changes that are coming the way of college athletics right now. So at the end of the day, it's still a commissioner job. I mean, you get off campus, you get off the politics that you have to deal with day to day in an athletic department, the way most, every AD in the country is dealing with right now. But, I can see, I mean, look, not that I ever wish this upon anyone again, but like we saw what happened to Kevin Warren's reputation when he got thrown into the fire right before the pandemic happened. And PR-wise, that's still been very hard for him in the Big Ten to overcome, regardless of who was actually pulling the strings behind the curtain there, so to speak. So there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of hard work that comes with these jobs, but it's definitely a different kind of change of pace and a different kind of challenge from the day-to-day that comes with working on a college campus.
Matt, we hear the name Schultz from Washington State, and you've given every reason why he would be a candidate they should talk to or will. Is there anybody else? We heard the name Oliver Luck, who may have done a little work with Bob when they were trying to survive the loss of Texas and Oklahoma story. I don't even know if that's something he's interested in. Is there anybody else you may have heard that might be a part of that list?
Yeah, it's interesting you say Oliver Luck. Yesterday, he publicly took a job with Althea Sports Partners, one of the leading NIL organizations in the country so far. And I think one of the people who worked there was interviewed by Sports Business Journal and got asked essentially, like, would this preclude him for potentially leaving to become the Big 12 commissioner or any other job? And it was essentially a long no comment. So I guess technically, if he were interested in the job, he'd still be a candidate. Another one, going back to the presidential Jim Clements at Clemson. I think he brings a lot of credibility from a name standpoint. He would be coming from a place that's won multiple national football championships under his watch. It has played for, I believe, 4 others. They made 6 straight playoffs before this past year. And he was, by all accounts, looking to get involved with the ACC commissioner search before ultimately getting a new deal and pulling out. Now, He was the president of West Virginia when West Virginia moved from the Big East to the Big 12. So he is also somewhat familiar with the lay of the land as well. But there's any number of ADs, if you want to go the quote-unquote traditional route, who I think would be up for this and would do a good job. I mean, Shane Lyons, also at West Virginia, is one of the more well-respected athletic directors in the country. Kirby Hocutt at Texas Tech, if we're going to keep it within the conference, is another name I think who will probably earn some consideration. Greg Byrne at Alabama, Bubba Cunningham in North Carolina, who's crazy enough the longest tenured AD in the ACC right now. It was the AD at Tulsa before that, and obviously is familiar with the lay of the land in Big 12 country. I don't think they'll have trouble finding their guy or girl whenever that is. I think the question is, are they going to hire a search firm? Who's that search firm going to be? And how are they going to go about the process of picking their new leader? Because we haven't seen this so much with commissioner searches, but we've seen it with AD searches, particularly in my backyard in Chicago with Northwestern last year. When you get too many cooks in the kitchen, that really impedes progress.
Yep.
And there's a lot of disagreement, and it's hard to build a consensus, and you get leaks from different parties with different interests, and it just scares a lot of otherwise viable candidates away.
One thing, Matt, is I know you're a Penn State guy, and that they're looking for an AD. Mack Rhodes, Baylor's AD, just had a new extension that now puts that out to 10 years. His name actually, I think, came up about Penn State and the Big 12 commissioner, but it looks like we've had him on. We're fortunate to get him on every week. That locked that out. He's no longer a part of that search, but that was something I wanted to throw in there as well.
Yeah, no, he was a name, but right, I believe it was the day before he had announced, or Baylor had announced that long-term extension for him. That was a name that was popular, at least among AD circles, about a guy who could get in the mix for Penn State's AD job. That's another one. I'll be curious to see the timing of that. They have a new president starting on May 9th. I would imagine she would want Neely Beneputi from Louisville. That is, I would imagine she would want an AD hire in there by then. But look, that's when we're talking AD jobs, it's hard to beat the Big Ten. Just with the money they're already making, the money they will be making, the history, the tradition, the dedication across the board to football, and really not just football, all sports. They have 31 of them at Penn State, and outside of men's basketball, they're pretty darn good at most of them every single year. I think that's a very attractive job, and who knows, there could be some cross-pool candidates going for both that job and the Big 12 commissioner job. I'll be curious to see how it all unfolds over the next couple of weeks. Good
stuff, Matt. Great stuff on the Cover 4 and also the way you're covering college athletics and more. Thanks for your time. We hope to have you again.
Anytime, guys. Appreciate it.
Matt Fortuna, the Athletic, at Matt_Fortuna. Again, the Cover 4 also discusses the ACC relocating from Greensboro to a place that's maybe travel-friendly. Orlando, Charlotte, those cities came up as well. When we come back, Craig mentioned the Nolan Ryan documentary. John McClain is on the trailer, so is our great friend Randy Galloway. He'll join us in the next segment.
We have John McClain coming up.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to mention Baylor Cupp, former Texas A&M tight end. It was a 5-star a couple years back. He had put his name in the transfer portal. He is committed to Texas Tech, so they have added former 5-star tight end Baylor Cupp. And the only thing about that is he's got to actually play. Great on paper, like any other recruit that you pick up, but he's got to actually play. And we know he had that bad leg injury, which he's apparently recovered from a couple years back.
He played in 8 games last year, but I don't think it was anything you'd be like, oh, 8 games. I mean, he played.
Yeah.
But he wasn't,
didn't rack up stats and do things like that.
Yeah, he was out for 2 years.
Yeah. That's so. Like I said, he's got to overcome injuries or continue to overcome injuries. But if he's capable of doing that, if he's healthy, then that's obviously a very dynamic player who just a couple years ago, I know A&M viewed him as a great potential weapon. So Baylor Cupp to Texas Tech.
5:38. John McClain joins us next on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. The city of Woodway. They have that mother-daughter brunch coming up in May. But what they also have is with a lot of what happens in the spring and summer, and Waco has become a tourist attraction. And not just spring and summer because of the silos, because of so many